Good morning and welcome to the 2025 Gerald Marx Lecture. One of the great privileges that you have as president of this society is to be able to choose the keynote speakers, and I'm pretty confident that you're going to really enjoy the choice that we've made today. Dr. Aimee van Wynsberghe is the Alexander von Humboldt Professor for the Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Bonn. She is director of the Institute for Science and Ethics and founder of the Bonn Sustainable AI Lab. She is a member of the German Academy for Sciences and Literature, Mainz, and an advisory board member for the DAAD Konrad Zuse Schools of Excellence in AI, and is a member of the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety, and Consumer Protections Expert Group on AI and Sustainability. She has served as a member of the European Commission's high-level expert group on AI and is a founding editor for the international peer-reviewed journal AI and Ethics. That's a Springer Nature journal. Professor van Wynsberghe has just launched a book series with Springer Nature on the philosophy and ethics of AI and is the author of the book Healthcare Robotics, Ethics, Design, and Implementation. She regularly appears in the media to promote awareness of the pressing ethical issues surrounding the design and use of robotics and AI in society. And on a personal note, I've known Dr. van Wynsberghe for several years and had to follow her career, and it is just remarkable how she has become an influencer and a thought leader in the ethics of surgical technology and just advanced technologies in general. And you are going to be delighted that she has found herself today at the perfect time to be at the intersection of artificial intelligence and sustainability. So I give you the 2025 Gerald Marx Lecturer, Dr. Aimee van Wynsberghe.
I'm feeling good. Fish in the sea.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, President Schlachta. Thank you, all of you, for being here this morning. It's such a privilege, it's such an honor to be able to speak for you this morning on this topic and also to be welcomed into this community. I've been told what a fabulous community this is, and I can say that you've lived up to the expectations, that everyone is so wonderful, welcoming, and incredibly brilliant. Thank you for the invitation to give the keynote speech today. Thank you also to Sally and to Carrie, who made sure that it was possible for me to actually get here. Thank you to the program chairs, Michael and Anne, for creating such an inspiring program and for allowing me to be a part of this. Yesterday was wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to what's coming in the next couple of days. Thank you also to all of the tech crew. There's a tech crew behind you there, a tech crew behind me backstage here, and all of the tech crew in the speakers lounge. It takes a community. It takes so many people to run a conference like this, and you've all been so wonderful, so thank you from me. So this morning, what I want to talk to you about is sustainability and artificial intelligence. And the way that I want to talk about this is to describe it in terms of the third wave of the ethics of artificial intelligence. I'll get into that a little bit more. Before I get into the core of my talk, though, I've been told to list any conflicts of interest or to disclose anything that you need to know about me. I mean, Chris said most of my bio there. I receive grant funding from multiple organizations, and I'm a member of different expert advisory groups, but I can say with confidence that I have no conflict of interest for this talk. So I hope I did that right. That's the first time I've had to do that. Okay. So even though Chris did give a bio, I thought it was also appropriate for me to tell a little bit about the story of myself, because I think that gives a lens with which you can see my presentation in a different way. So to start out, I'm not a classically trained philosopher or ethicist. I actually began my academic career in cell biology. In Canada at the University of Western Ontario. And it was during my undergraduate studies that I was also working at CSTAR, Canadian Surgical Technologies and Advanced Robotics, with Dr. Schlachta. And I was part of the engineering team where we were training surgeons how to use the Zuse telesurgical system. You remember Zuse? long time ago, and the earlier versions of the Da Vinci surgical system. And so it was this experience, though, that really opened my eyes to how we were introducing and designing healthcare technologies, how we were evaluating them to decide whether or not they were good or bad or right or wrong in the healthcare context. And of course, it was incredibly important. We were looking for measures for efficiency, accuracy, number of errors in terms of the surgeon's performance, all of this definitely necessary. But I was struck by the idea of, isn't there something more that we should be looking at when we're deciding whether or not this is a good technology? Because it's, reshaping the healthcare tradition. It's reshaping how surgery was actually practiced. And so that led me to take a step away from the natural sciences and to walk into the humanities to see what this field of ethics had to offer. So I went on to study bioethics and applied ethics, and I did my PhD in robot ethics. And all with this idea of what is it that I can learn from the ethics space and then bring back to the natural sciences, bring back to the engineers and the technology developers. So in addition to my role in academia, I also work with not-for-profit organizations and policymakers. I also have done some consulting in the public sector. But mostly right now, my work is in the academic space. So as was mentioned, I hold the chair in the Applied Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. I'm also director of the Institut für Wissenschaft und Ethik in Deutsch, if there's any German speakers in the room, which is really the Institute for Science and Ethics. And at this institute, I work with political scientists, with members from agriculture or with faculty from agriculture. I work with a team at our Uniclinic, so our hospital at the University of Bonn. Also working with political scientists, neuroethicists, environmental ethicists, so it's really a multidisciplinary team. And then within the Institute for Science and Ethics, I run the Bonn Sustainable AI Lab. And this is a dedicated group of researchers where we're looking at this concept of sustainability and artificial intelligence. And we're working hard to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where we have greenwashing or ethics washing, that you can just sort of slap a sustainable AI label on it and everything's fine. So we're trying to be very critical of the technology and critical of the terminology of sustainable AI. I'm also a visiting professor at Western University in Canada, and I work closely together with an engineering professor over there. So I say all of this, talking about I'm working with this discipline and that discipline, or policymakers, or in the private space, all of these different facets of my role, but I have one clear vision. And that vision has to do with the role of the ethicist and the role of ethics. And so many of you might be familiar with the phrase ethics stifles innovation. Yeah, and I imagine many of you have come across research ethics boards where your proposal has been rejected, or the ethicist isn't always a friend to the team. Oftentimes the person in the room, shaking their finger, why are you doing this or you can't do that? But what I want to do in my role as an ethicist is to change that, to change the conversation, and to look at how we can think of ethics to inspire innovation, to help us create new kinds of technologies, but also to help us shape or steer the pathway that we're developing technologies. And in this role, what I call the ethicist as designer, I imagine the ethicist to be a member of the design team, and they have a very specific role. The ethicist is meant to uncover the values that are incredibly important in society, the values that we want to preserve, to make sense of these values, to understand these values, and then to look at how we can translate these into technical requirements. So the talk that I'm going to give to you today in about 45 minutes, hopefully I stay on time, is not about the possibilities of AI in healthcare, right? I was at one of the sessions yesterday talking about all of the different ways that AI is being used or can be used in healthcare. That's not the purpose of this talk. The purpose of this talk is really to look at the study of the ethics of artificial intelligence and to bring this to you. So again, this idea of studying the humanities and trying to bring it outside of this particular academic discipline. And so with the theme of unleashing your potential, my goal then is to introduce you to this space of AI ethics and to see what kind of ideas, what kind of potentials you actually unleash in your own thinking. So I'll begin by discussing what is AI ethics, or these are at least the four main points that I want to get across. What is the ethics of artificial intelligence? I do this by talking about the different waves of AI, and the focus of the presentation is to introduce this third wave of AI ethics, this next generation of AI ethics, which I refer to as sustainable AI. In order for me to discuss this, to give you the full picture, I need to stress the global nature of AI and the planetary nature of AI, which I will get into later. And then what I also want to stress is that sustainable AI, or the sustainability of AI, goes far beyond just talking about energy consumption and carbon emissions. Hopefully I make that clear. And I will end with a call to action, again, to unleash your potential. So AI in healthcare, as you know, is among the most promising applications, already achieving groundbreaking results. In 2024, two of the founders of DeepMind, Demis Hassabis and John Jumper from Google DeepMind, they won, or they shared, actually, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for AlphaFold. And AlphaFold is an AI tool revolutionizing protein structure prediction and accelerating pharmaceutical development. The AI in healthcare market is actually expected to grow from 15.4 billion in 2022 to 208 billion by 2030. This is Gardner View Research that's predicting this in 2023. Of course, AI is used for a multitude of applications, for increasing efficiency as decision support tools, reviewing video data from laparoscopic surgeries, and the list goes on and on. Now, the latest methodology in artificial intelligence is generative AI, not to be confused with artificial general intelligence, but Gen AI. And this is projected, so of the 208 billion, Gen AI is projected to make up about 17 billion by 2030 of the global AI market. And from Gen AI, we have things like ChatGPT, medical imaging, virtual assistants and chatbots are the most predominant applications. And the idea is that Gen AI is going to save millions, 150 billion, actually, annually. This is Gardner projecting this, because chatbots will, at least the projection is, or the prediction is, chatbots will make up about 75% of routine patient interactions by 2030. So again, the idea is that AI is going to increase efficiency and help cut costs in the healthcare sector. So there's big promises, right? These are big numbers. These are impressive numbers when we think about it. But alongside these promises, alongside all of these benefits that we hear about, there come multiple concerns. How was the model trained? Are the outputs reliable? Are there safeguards in place for when patients are interacting with a virtual assistant or a chatbot? And the list goes on and on. And these are the questions that AI ethicists concern ourselves with. These are the things that we are really interested in trying to understand. And that is the focus of this morning. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page when we're talking about artificial intelligence, and I imagine many of you are much more of experts than I am, but so that we're on the same page. The way that I think of artificial intelligence is kind of this umbrella term. Yeah? And you have the idea that we're trying to create human-like intelligence in a machine. And there are different ways of achieving this human-like intelligence. Good old-fashioned AI, symbolic reasoning, machine learning, neural networks, and now generative AI. But the idea is we're striving for some kind of human-like intelligence, and it could be little pieces like prediction or being able to recognize patterns. Yeah? The focus of AI applications these days is really predominantly machine learning, neural networks, and generative AI. So while I am talking about the umbrella term of AI for the rest of the talk, keep in mind that the majority of the issues that are raised are related to ML, neural networks, and Gen AI. Now, what is ethics? Okay, I could spend the rest of the day talking about what ethics is, but in one slide, how I will describe it. It depends really also who you're asking or who you're talking to when you are looking for an answer to this question. So some people talk about ethics in terms of consequentialism. Yeah, it's the consequences that determine whether or not an action is right or wrong or good or bad. Or deontology, which is very common in the healthcare sector, right? The principalist approach, the Hippocratic Oath, the 4 bioethics principles. This is the idea that it's not about the consequences, but if you followed a rule, if you followed a principle, then you've done the right thing, the good thing. Then we have virtue ethics, right? What is the virtuous surgeon? What kind of characteristics or traits does the virtuous surgeon have? We have theories like care ethics, feminist ethics. We also have to look outside of a Western context because there's a variety of ethical traditions outside of our familiar or normal context. Ubuntu ethics, which is the predominant form of ethics in sub-Saharan Africa, or Confucianism. So there's a variety of different answers that we can draw on when we're talking about what is ethics. But for the purpose of this talk, to be able to tell a story in the way that I want to tell it, I suggest that we take the Aristotelian version of what is ethics, and that is the study of the good life. What it is, and how we can achieve it. Okay, and that's a huge concept, right? What is she talking about, the good life? I understand that, but in order to break it down, let's imagine the good life, again, as this broad, messy picture, and we have puzzle pieces. We have ingredients that we can talk about, values, in order to achieve or to paint our picture of the good life. Things like safety, security. Yesterday, I was at a talk by General Miller, and he talked about trust and competence as building blocks in terms of the good life. Well, that's my words, in terms of the good life. Sustainability, privacy, consent, all of these different components that allow us to paint a picture of what the good life actually is. And we can take that even further. We can be more specific and say, not only is it about the good life, but for the purposes of this talk, the good healthcare tradition. Yeah, what are the puzzle pieces of a good healthcare tradition? Then that leads us to, what is the ethics of artificial intelligence? And this is also a really complicated question because there's no agreed upon definition for the ethics of AI. And in fact, there are something like 84 different ethics standards. There are hundreds of different ethics principles that have been published in the AI ethics space. We have different fields like trustworthy AI. This is the European Commission that puts forward this idea of trustworthy AI. Responsible AI, Virginia Dignam. AI fairness, AI safety, explainable AI, human-centered AI. So in the AI ethics space, there is no sort of one golden thread, one shining star that we can point to say, this is what the ethics of AI is. But if we think about how I was just talking about ethics, then we can look at the ethics of AI through that lens. So if ethics is the study of the good life, what it is and how we can achieve it, then the ethics of artificial intelligence is, what is the impact that AI has on our vision of the good life or our ability to achieve it? And what's important here is that it's not just about, okay, let's make AI and then use it and then look at what's happened to these values, yeah? I also put forward this idea that the ethics of AI is looking at all of the ethical issues related to each of the different stages in the life cycle in the development of artificial intelligence. So that means that ethics isn't an afterthought, right? The project of AI ethics means looking at the ethical issues from the very moment of idea generation throughout the design stages of the model. So what have AI ethicists been focused on so far? I categorize this in terms of themes or waves, as I refer to them. Now, the first wave of AI ethics has really been focused on superintelligence or artificial general intelligence, not to be confused with Gen AI. AGI is something very different. And the questions here really had to do with these dystopian visions, right? These very negative perspectives of AI is going to rise up and end humanity, is going to end mankind. Or we hear about the Terminator scenario or Space Odyssey, or AI is going to take all of our jobs. We won't have nurses anymore. We won't need surgeons because we have autonomous robots. So these really negative dystopian futures where the technology overpowers humanity, if you will. And this is how the field sort of started, at least in the last 20 years or so. But we've also seen a resurgence, or at least in 2024, we saw a resurgence of this line of thinking. Sam Altman from OpenAI, or the Center for AI Safety, the Future of Life Institute, they published these statements saying that AI posed the biggest existential threat to humanity, and that we needed to mitigate the risk of extinction from AI. This should be one of our priorities alongside pandemics and nuclear war. But really, what these ethicists, or what these these narratives, if you will, are doing are presenting these speculative futures, warnings, that are actually used to divert our attention from the real immediate harms. And in so doing, they constitute a kind of strategic manipulation aimed at avoiding regulation and stoking AI hype. And so this idea of avoiding regulation is important because in 2024, that's when the European Commission actually ratified the European Union AI Act. And so the statements were very strategically timed that just before ratification of the regulation went through, we had this, we shouldn't have this regulation, we should be talking about extinction instead, extinction of humanity instead. So as a response to this, AI ethicists started to look around and were thinking, there's actually a lot of applications that are happening in society. It's not just about whether or not AI is going to take all of our jobs or replace us in the future in general, but it's really, what are the different applications? So AI in healthcare, AI in predictive policing, AI in the military context. What is happening in these different applications? And is there a way that we can fix some of the ethical issues that we predict through design solutions? So some of the issues that we see in this second wave of AI ethics have to do with privacy. I don't know if you'll remember, but in 2016, the NHS over in the UK made an agreement with Google DeepMind where they would share all of the data that they had with DeepMind in order for DeepMind to develop certain AI applications for a healthcare context. And it was this moment, or this was, I would say, the seed of the moment of the discussion, where people really started to think about what's happening to privacy. And then we had to think, well, what does privacy mean? Well, we were starting to understand that privacy had to do with having control over our data, not just giving consent about whether or not it would be used, which is also a crucial detail, but it's my data, I own it, I want to have control over it. This is the narrative that was being played out. So we started to see this in 2016, and it hasn't gone away. We see this narrative coming up time and time again. Questions of accuracy are also incredibly at play during the second wave of AI ethics. And the idea is that the more data you have, the greater accuracy you have in the outputs of the resulting model. And of course, this is questioned. Now people are talking about the more parameters that you have for the model, that's meant to increase accuracy as well. But then you had this sort of tension between values. Of course you want to have the model as accurate as possible. Nobody's going to deny that. But in order to have this high level of accuracy, you have to balance it against the principle for data minimization. The idea moving forward is that you wanted to reduce data collection, reduce the amount of data that you used in general. So what do you do when you have a tension in the balancing of these values in this way? And this is very much real. I mentioned that one of the collaborators that I work with is the clinic, the university clinic over at the University of Bonn. And one of the models that they're trying to develop right now is for detection of liver disease, or kidney disease, sorry. And they're trying to create a model so that they can create a more efficient process when patients are coming through the hospital. And my job is to sit there and ask, well, where is the data coming from? Well, they can only use the data within their hospital, right? Because our data protection laws are very incredibly strict. And then the question is, okay, is that representative? Yeah? Okay, well, in order to get representative data, they need more data, yeah? So they're also, all of these project teams, these research teams, are struggling with this idea, or with this tension, this balancing between accuracy and data minimization. You have issues of accountability and safety, which are the cornerstone of the professionalization of medicine. And when you think about, so one of the examples that is often talked about in the AI ethics space is AI for suicide prevention, these chatbots, these virtual assistants. And I don't know if you remember, but Facebook, or Meta was involved in this from the very early stages, that they were using AI to make predictions about individuals' posts. There's also companies that use AI to go through employees' emails to make predictions about whether or not an employee is at risk of committing suicide. So this raises the issues, in terms of accountability and safety, whose hands should these AI tools be in? Right? Is this something for only healthcare practitioners to be able to encourage the use of, or to provide this kind of technology to people? Or is it okay for tech to be involved in this kind of thing? So then other issues related to this second wave have to do with data, how we actually source data. So before we even get to the training of an algorithm, how do we arrive at this training data? How is the data sourced? We learned important lessons from the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal in terms of creating false surveys where data was generated about an individual and then a profile was made, used for targeted advertising. Should that be allowed to source data in that way? Another question, data collection. Right? Think of companies, well, think of how GPT was created by scraping the internet, or Clearview, scraping the internet for all of the images in order to create a facial recognition program. secondary usage of the data, is that allowed? Should that be allowed? Should we have regulation to prevent it, or should we rely on companies to do what they think is in the best interest of individuals? Another stage in the life of the training data has to do with data labeling. Now, this becomes incredibly interesting because we are seeing that data labeling farms, what they call them, data labeling farms, are popping up all over now. And in particular, OpenAI has certain data labeling farms in Kenya where individuals are paid less than or approximately $2 a day to do the labeling of pixels or of images. And this is used for machine learning algorithms. Think of autonomous vehicles, for example, that require excessive labeling. A new report by Rachel Adams called AI in Africa also discusses the use of refugees in refugee camps for this data labeling, free labeling, or prisoners in prisons to, again, do this free labeling. So in order for us to have these relatively cheap or free services, they really aren't. There's a lot of individuals that are involved in order for us to have these kinds of services. Then, so that's looking at the training data. Now let's actually train a model. One of the methodologies that I'd mentioned, machine learning, this became very much a topic of conversation because it introduced a new variable into the debate. Whereas earlier models that were used, we knew the rules that were generated. Actually, we decided on the rules that would be used in order for a model to make a prediction, to make an output about a prediction. But with machine learning, we were introduced to this different approach, that it's possible we don't know the rules or understand the rules that the model has created in order to make a prediction, in order to make an assumption about a pattern within the data. And this raises some really interesting questions in terms of accountability and responsibility. What do you do in the healthcare space? What do you do if you have a recommendation, but you don't exactly or entirely know how the model arrived at the recommendation? Do you want to be accountable in case the recommendation was inaccurate? Do you want the tech developers to be accountable? Do you want the hospital, the institution to be accountable? And we were first introduced to this in 2016, 2018. So in 2016, this is when we had the first fatality of a driver in a Tesla that was in semi-autonomous mode. And in 2018, we had the first fatality of a pedestrian, of a self-driving Uber. And in both of those situations, it was really interesting where it challenged our conception of responsibility, accountability, and liability. Nobody wanted to take accountability of the consequences of the action, which isn't surprising, but interesting that it really shifted our way of thinking. How do we now assign these kind of attributes? The owners of the company said, nah, it's not, no, this is not my responsibility. It's obviously the driver, it's a car, right? And the driver said, how is it my responsibility? It's a self-driving car. That sort of defeats the purpose of having a self-driving car in semi-autonomous mode or in autonomous mode. It must be the developers. And the developers were saying, well, no, the whole point of a machine learning algorithm is that it's meant to learn as it is exposed to its environment. It's not possible for us to be able to predict every single scenario that the car will interact with. So what do we do in these kinds of situations? These are the sort of questions that the second wave of AI ethics was looking at. And of course, I can go on and on, but the crux or the main point that I want to talk about is this third wave, and to introduce you to this third wave of AI ethics. And what's interesting here is when I was a member of the European Commission high-level expert group on artificial intelligence, we created what was known as the Guidelines for Trustworthy AI. And this formed the basis for the European AI Act, the regulations that we have in place today. And you'll notice that in the regulations, they're really based on these second wave ethical issues, these second wave ethical concerns, which is wonderful. But it's interesting to note that as we have more experience with the technology, as we are using it more, developing it more, we learn more about the technology. And to see the growth of AI at such an incredible rate, we can also see the need for more energy, right? These systems require energy. The carbon emissions resulting from the physical infrastructure. So we're starting to understand that there's an infrastructure sort of at play here. And this led me to to think about this idea of taking a step back from the second wave ethical issues. So while this is incredibly, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying let's throw them out and not worry about that at all. Absolutely incredibly important. But when you're focusing in on the tree, right? When you're focusing in on a certain application or design methodology, you lose sight of the larger picture. So taking a step back and looking at what's happening AI qua AI, AI as an infrastructure. And so that's essentially what the third wave is about, taking this step back, focusing on the infrastructure. Think about how does AI change the healthcare system? And we learned from the robotics space that it's not just you get your Da Vinci robot and it's in the hospital and you just figure out how you can work with it. Fine. You have to direct resources in order to purchase the technology. You have to do training. You have to question what is expertise now in the healthcare sector, right? So the introduction of robotics had a ripple effect. And the same thing is happening with artificial intelligence as well. So taking this step back, looking at the structures in place, this can happen in a variety of ways. The structures can be geopolitical or economic, right? Who's making the decisions about what AI models are developed, how they're developed, what they're going to be used for, or who's going to actually use them? This is in the hands of a small subset of people on this planet. These are the geopolitical issues that I'm referring to. But what I want to do is to focus on the environmental consequences of artificial intelligence when we take this step back and look at the bigger picture. So the first point that I want to make is that AI is a global planetary endeavor. It's planetary in the sense that we need resources from our planet. And it's global in the sense that there's no such thing as AI made in Germany or AI made in Europe. So to emphasize the first part, this planetary nature, I think the language that's used when we're talking about AI, right? AI is, the model is running on the cloud or the data is stored on the cloud. The cloud, yeah? It feels like it's not of this planet. It's brilliant when you think about it, but it hides us to the reality that there's very much a physical infrastructure to artificial intelligence. Then when we think about the global nature of AI, as I mentioned before, this idea of AI made in Europe or AI made in Germany. AI made in Germany is actually in our federal ministry's strategy for artificial intelligence. And what I tried to do is to emphasize the fact that that's not possible. When you look at the entire life cycle of artificial intelligence, it's not possible to say AI made in Germany or AI made in Europe because the minerals are coming from different continents, or they're processed in a different continent, or the electronic waste is going to a different continent. So really, the global community is involved in the making and the usage and the disposal of this artificial intelligence infrastructure. And so to do this, to put it in more concrete terms, what I talk about is sustainable AI. And while it seems like a really layman's distinction, it is, yeah. But at the time that I was writing this paper, sustainable AI was synonymous with AI for sustainability. And so what I was trying to show with this work is that you have sustainable AI and you have these two different branches, AI for sustainability and the sustainability of AI. And when you think of that first branch, AI for sustainability, there's a lot of research in this space. The United Nations is really pushing AI to accelerate or to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at any big tech company, go to their website and you'll see AI for climate, AI for people, AI for the good, AI for sustainability. Yeah, there's a ton of initiatives at looking at how we can use AI to achieve some kind of a quote unquote good end. And while I think that that's noble, again, don't get me wrong, I think that that's wonderful. The problem is that many individuals conflate AI for sustainability with sustainable AI. That if we're using AI to achieve some kind of sustainable end, well, then it must be sustainable, right? The problem is that's not actually the case. When you get deeper into AI for sustainability, then the conversation changes. So what am I talking about when I say the sustainability of AI? Yeah, what kind of ecological footprints am I actually trying to make reference to? Well, the first is carbon emissions. And yes, I said it goes beyond carbon emissions, but still, this is important to talk about. So back in 2019, Emma Struble from Carnegie Mellon, she was one of the first to publish results looking into carbon emissions when training a natural language processing model. She used one GPU, and she was working with something called the BERT model. Relatively few parameters used for the training. And she found that the training of this model resulted in approximately 280 metric tons of carbon dioxide. The equivalent of this is the carbon emissions of 5 cars over the lifetime of those cars, okay? And I've done many interviews with journalists when they say like, okay, Aimee, relax, we can handle 5 cars on the road, you know, like simmer down. But what's interesting is that we're not just talking about 5 cars anymore. That was the first study. That was the first study to show us what kind of scale we were actually talking about. But now BERT, yeah, you can see where, I don't have a pointer, but you can see where BERT is, yeah, down here on the scale. And this is in terms of the level of parameters. So the more parameters, the more accurate you have. At least that's the hypothesis at this point. But now the models that we're talking about are in the 500 billion range of parameters. So BERT is about 100 million. Yeah, 100 million parameters in 2018, and now we're talking about 500 billion parameters in 2023. Increase in parameters, increase in energy consumption, increase in carbon dioxide emissions. Then Sasha Lucioni did a study, she's from Hugging Face. She did a study, or she's done research into what happens when we're talking about carbon emissions depending on the energy source that's used, whether it's carbon intensive or renewable energies. So she was looking at 2022 era large language models trained using renewable energy, emitting approximately 25 metric tons of carbon dioxide. However, when using coal or natural gas, as is the case with GPT-3, this number jumps to 500 metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions. Yeah? So 2 points to take away from this. During a single training run of GPT-3, using non-renewable energy sources, we have an increase, much higher increase in carbon dioxide emissions when compared to using renewable energy sources. However, what further studies showed from a different researcher is that during a single training run of GPT-3, more carbon dioxide was emitted in South Africa and India than in any other region. So we're not just talking about an increase in carbon dioxide emissions, we're also talking about where those emissions are happening. This depends on where the computing center is. Second point, this is only talking about training of the model, not the actual usage or the retraining. GPT-3, all the GPTs are retrained, retuned, fine-tuned a number of times, and this also requires energy. So right now, we only have numbers for a small number of models that are being trained, and we only have numbers on the training. This is not a very good way to actually paint a picture in terms of sustainable AI. And so this introduces another problem. This graph is showing you the openness, right? Whether or not we can actually get the number of parameters and whether or not we can actually get a source of how much energy is consumed for the training of this model. And again, we can see BERT in the bottom left-hand corner. So very low number of parameters. Remember the 5 cars? And like, oh, don't worry about 5 cars. Well, we're not talking about 5 cars anymore. And BERT is also green, so it's fully open. So we have access into how much energy is required for the training and then the resulting carbon emissions. As we move over increasing the number of parameters, it becomes fully closed. We don't have information or access to this anymore. This raises the question of transparency. As the number of parameters increase, the transparency decreases. So how do we actually get a full picture? And this is where democratizing AI comes in. So again, going back to how there's no universal definition of AI ethics, there's a variety of different branches or themes that people talk about within this discipline. Democratizing AI is one of those. And there's 2 different ways to think about it. Democratizing AI can be in terms of including a larger variety of stakeholders in the discussion, in the decision-making process. Or democratizing AI can be thought of as making available the resources that are necessary in order to create AI, having open source models, having open source data sets. And DeepSeek has actually kind of changed the game because of using open source models, but of course we still have a long ways to go. But this lack of transparency becomes incredibly important for us to be able to get a full picture when we're talking about what is this question of the sustainability of AI. Looking into another ecological footprint, the mining of precious minerals. Now, interestingly enough, GPUs have been called rare earth minerals when talking about the AI space, and GPUs have replaced CPUs. So these are what's necessary. GPUs are more efficient than CPUs, and they're a necessary component in order for running the model. The most common in the AI space was the A100, which is now being placed with the H100. And it's GPUs that were used for the creation of ChatGPT. So considered to be like, amazing, like the next wave in AI. But in reality, so while people are talking about GPUs being the rare earth minerals, the gold for AI, they actually say, in reality, there are actually rare earth minerals, rare earth minerals, that are needed for this physical infrastructure. And so consider that in our modern electronics, we need a plethora of rare earth minerals. We need lithium, copper, gold, manganese, palladium, platinum, and the list goes on and on and on. And what I'm showing you here is an image of a smartphone and some of the minerals that are actually required in the smartphone, from the screen to the battery to the casing and whatnot. We know about the smartphone. We have that information, but we don't know about GPUs, the latest, right? Moving forward after CPUs. One of my students, Sophia Falk, is actually working on a research project right now where she's purchased the A100 and grinding them up in a special blender, not like a home blender, an actual like special blender to do this, sending them off to the laboratory so that we can assess, we can get a number of what are the different minerals that are involved in the A100, and then trying to do a life cycle assessment, a life cycle analysis to track where are these minerals sourced from, to have an idea of the different countries. And to be clear, the minerals, rare earth minerals, are coming from a variety of countries, yeah, or a variety of continents. So, of course, Chile, Brazil, the US is big for lithium, China. But many of the minerals are coming from the continent of Africa. In fact, nearly half the world's gold comes from Africa, and about a third of the world's minerals are coming from Africa. According to the United Nations, Africa is home to approximately 30% of the world's mineral reserves, 12% of the world's oil reserves, and 8% of natural gas. Yet, interestingly enough, most of Africa doesn't have a mineral strategy. So this raises another ethical issue, what we call ethics dumping. And this is a practice where you export practices to countries that don't have the same sort of regulations or protections for individuals. So we would say, okay, in a country like Canada, maybe there is the possibility to do some of this mining, but it's very expensive. So it's exported to another country where we don't have to worry about the same regulations. It makes it cheaper, more affordable, so that we have our, again, quote unquote, free or relatively inexpensive services. And then this gets to the question of the conditions in the mines. And so since antiquity, mining conditions have been horrific. I'm not saying that just with AI, we have awful mining conditions. However, this is a result of colonization. And what people are talking about in the AI ethics space is this renewed fear of colonization, but a new form of colonization. They call it digital colonization. And so countries in Africa are fighting for what is known as digital sovereignty, and whether or not that's actually possible. And they suggest that one of the ways to begin this step towards digital sovereignty, or to push back to decolonize AI, is to look at the mining practices. The mining of rare earth minerals, now these minerals are referred to as blood minerals. Remember blood diamond and those conversations? Well, now we have the same kind of conversation happening when we're talking about these minerals. Many of the mines in Africa are legal, but there's many mines that are actually illegal. And so you have people working in horrific conditions. But it's not only the conditions that they're working in, it's what happens while you're engaged in the process of mining. So when you're extracting minerals from the planet, from the earth, this lack of homeostasis usually creates a buildup of a new toxin, or previous toxins that were already in the soil. But the process of mining then means that you have toxins in the soil, which also go into the water. And when you think of a mine in Africa, so I'm mostly familiar with Ghana because I work with researchers in Ghana, and they talk about mining communities. So it's not like you get on a bus and you go to the mine and your community, your family is safely far away from the mine. No, it's a mining community. The mine, the community, the village is structured around the mine. So when we're talking about the toxins building up in the soil, contaminating the water, this has an impact on the hundreds of thousands of people that are living around the mine. And in fact, it's hundreds of millions of people and families that rely on these mining practices in order to have some kind of family income. So what are we doing to these populations? Another ecological footprint that I want to touch on is electronic waste. And so you remember when I started talking about what is AI ethics, and I said looking at the ethical issues related to each of the stages in the life cycle of artificial intelligence, we can't forget the disposal of this physical infrastructure. What happens? So I also mentioned that the A100 is what was used to create GPT, and that the A100 is now being replaced with the H100. So what are we going to do with all of these A100s, right? What happens to this physical infrastructure? Well, it shouldn't be a surprise that it's not staying in the United States or in Canada or in Europe. In fact, the Circular Economy Plan states that the European Union renews less than 40% of their electronic waste, which is a generous figure. Most electronic waste is shipped from Europe, Japan, the United States to other countries. Again, think of ethics dumping, right? Other countries that have less stringent environmental protections, we shirk our ethics responsibility onto them. Ghana, a country in Africa, actually has the largest e-waste mountain, they call it. And so not only is it not aesthetically pleasing to look at, but again, we return to this idea of the toxins that are in the physical infrastructure. And so you have individuals that are working to disassemble some of the components or the parts that I was talking about, but many of the components will just be sitting in dumps or in these e-waste mountains that they have in Ghana. And what happens? What happens here? Well, the toxins that are in this physical infrastructure seep into the soil and into the water. The water in Ghana is becoming so contaminated at this point that they're projecting that by 2030, they'll have to start importing water into the country because it's becoming so undrinkable for the community. And this is horrifying when you think of Africa as being the driest of the world's continents. 45% of the land mass is actually dry land. So it's a vicious cycle if you think about it, if you think about the overall picture, right? That we are extracting minerals in order to create this physical infrastructure, leaving toxins in the soil, in the water. We process it, we source it, we build up our infrastructure, we use it, we are able to create awesome memes with kittens and things like that, and then we dispose of it and it goes back and the toxins go back into the soil and the water. It's this vicious cycle of a hidden demographic that we're not even thinking about. This is what the electronic waste, or part of the electronic waste mountain, looks like. And for the members of the community who are trying to get some kind of benefit from the materials that they have, they end up burning a lot of the materials in order to extract some copper that might be usable for them. So not only are we talking about toxins in the soil and in the water, but now also in the air as well. And then I ask a provocative question at this point. Two provocative questions, actually. We, the rich countries, and I'm referring to sort of the global north in general, but the rich countries, we've become so rich because of colonization, because of these mining practices, because of this exploitation. Do we have a moral obligation, a moral responsibility to prevent the digital colonization that I brought up earlier? And only the privileged have the power to do so. So only those who have the resources, who have the money, who have the seat at the table can make a change. Does that mean that we have an obligation to make that change? And two, more specific to healthcare, how do we decide, so thinking of the principle of proportionality, how do we decide that AI for healthcare here in the global north is worth the consequences for the health of those in the global south? So, mic drop, dropping those two provocative questions. And the list goes on, yeah? So I'm only raising a few of the ecological footprints that I think are necessary to discuss, but also looking at my time. The list goes on, the usage of water for cooling the data centers, the decrease in biodiversity. We can, in terms of biodiversity loss, we can go on and on. Okay, so what now? Yeah, and as I mentioned before, right, the ethicist is the one in the room who's like, no, you shouldn't do that. Oh, it's so bad. And I was like, no, I have a different stance. Okay, so now we get to my different stance, yeah? I was intentionally trying to raise, like, this is the severity of the problem. This is what we're talking about. But only when we recognize and confront the fact that there are these problems can we do something about it. So what comes next, yeah? When we're thinking about sustainable AI, right, when you think of to sustain something, you want to maintain something. That's also not what I'm trying to get across with this concept of sustainable AI. In these situations, once we understand what's going on, we want to repair, we want to transform that part of the life cycle of the artificial intelligence infrastructure. We want to bridge the digital divide between who can and who can't actually make AI. We want to resist digital colonization. We want to democratize AI. And so how do we do this? Well, fortunately, there are possibilities. There are ways that we can actually achieve this. On the large scale, we need regulation. We need to demand transparency and accountability. So when I was talking to you about how the lack of understanding what kind of energy costs we're talking about, whether or not renewables are used or more carbon-rich energy sources, we need regulation in order to create a level playing field and to make this necessary. And thankfully, in Germany, like I had mentioned, one of the ministries has an AI and sustainable expert group. And so the idea then, policymakers are interested in having this conversation and perhaps actually creating policies or regulation in this direction. In the AI Act, also, there are directions pointing to, or arrows leading to this idea of can we do something to protect the environment with the use of, or the development and the use of artificial intelligence. And interestingly enough, in the United States, there was a bill proposed in the summer of 2024 that was suggesting the need for an environmental impact assessment when it comes to artificial intelligence. The bill wasn't ratified. However, it's a good step that policymakers are actually thinking about that. So we should be optimistic that there is something in the pipelines. But then on an individual or a group level, right, the people in this audience thinking, okay, what can I do? Well, if you're using artificial intelligence or if you're developing these models, think about how you can use smaller, more efficient models. Think about whether or not you can insist that your hospital or your research team is using renewable energy sources or open source models for fine-tuning, and to reuse these models so that you're not starting from scratch, reinventing the wheel each time, because that creates a larger need for energy and resources. Can you limit, as an individual, can you limit your GPT queries? Can you ask yourself also, is AI the best option in this particular case? Is it necessary? Sometimes yes, absolutely. And sometimes no. Sometimes it's AI for the sake of using AI. And then also thinking outside the box. So I mentioned that I'm working with this engineer over at Western University in Canada, and he works in agrivoltaics and greenhouses and whatnot. And so we just published or submitted a paper for publication where we're looking at proof of concept, whether or not it's possible to take the excess heat that's generated from data centers and to repurpose that heat. So instead of using water to cool the data centers and having a misuse of this water, maybe we can take that heat and use it for something else, like greenhouses. And in the proof of concept, we were showing how many tomatoes, in fact, using the excess heat from all of the data centers in the United States, you can actually have enough heat for greenhouses to grow tomatoes for the entire country. So there are possibilities to think outside the box. What's a different way? You know, if sustainability or recycling is the ethical value and we want to innovate based on that value, what are things that we can think of along these lines? So then in wrapping up, in conclusion, I leave you with a call to action. I know it's big. I know it's big what I was talking about, and I don't mean to make you feel powerless. Instead, I want the opposite. Now that you know, what can you do, or what do you want to do about it? What do you and your team, as an individual, or you, your team, or your research institute, or your sector, could be creating policies, could be engaging in partnerships with the Global South for sharing resources, could be demanding only renewables are used. But I leave this to you, the experts, the stewards of our health, to unleash your potential, following with the theme of the conference, to dream beyond the current paradigm, and to see if there's a way that we can shape the future with these values of sustainability and well-being, structuring the beginning of the conversation and the future of the research and development in the AI production lifecycle. So with that, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time, and hope to see you around. Thanks.
I'm just going to say, wow. Thank you so much for that lecture. Very much appreciated. And here is a plaque commemorating that you were the 2025 Gerald Marx Lecturer. Thank you, Dr. van Wynsberghe.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, picture?
Picture taken somewhere. Here you go.